Contempt and disrespect are the most damaging dynamics in long-term committed relationships. They're destructive and they actually predict the end of the relationship. In this video, I want to explain what's going on with contemptment in the relationship, why it's happening from a neurobiological and psychological perspective, and most importantly, what you can do about it to stop it and improve the state of your relationship. Well, what's contempt? Contempt is a pattern of behavior that signals and communicates disrespect to the other person. Probably the place where we've heard the term most is in TV and movie courtroom dramas, where somebody stands up and yells, "Lies, all lies!" and the judge bangs the gavel and says, "Be quiet and sit down, or I will hold you in contempt of court." Well, what the judge is saying is that behavior is showing disrespect to the legal process, because the court is supposed to be this somber place. In another video, I introduced what Dr. John Gottman calls the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Basically, the 4 dynamics in a relationship that predict the end of the relationship. Dr. John Gottman argues that disrespect and contempt is the worst of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the 4 dynamics that predict the end of the relationship. So we want to stamp these out, and in this video I'm going to explain what they are, why they're destructive, and most importantly, what you can do to stop it if you're the one doing the contempt to your partner, or even if you are the one receiving the contemptuous messages from your partner. Contempt and disrespect, it looks like disrespect. It looks like talking down, being condescending, maybe mockery, maybe hostile humor. Those sorts of things are contempt in action. If it sounds like a frustrated parent talking down to a child, then that's a very good indication that there's contempt being used in the relationship. Of course, parents shouldn't do contempt to their children either, but that's often sort of the dynamic that's going on when contempt is being used. It's like somebody feels like a parent and they're talking down, making the other person feel like a child, and very, very destructive. It's got to stop. So we no longer have a relationship of equals. We have somebody up and somebody down. It's not an equal relationship. I would argue both people are going to feel frustrated with that kind of a relationship over time. So that kind of a dynamic in a relationship is going to be destructive to the relationship. That's what the clinical research from Dr. John Gottman's research lab indicates. But as well, it's also destructive for the individual receiving the contemptuous messages. That person is more prone to anxiety disorders, more prone to depression, and more prone to just simply chronic stress. And what we know from other research is that chronic stress leads to a depressed or a suppressed immune system, and that in turn leaves the person prone and vulnerable to a host of physical disorders, so more prone to colds, flus, and more susceptible to pick up infections and viruses, and we're all thinking about viruses these days, aren't we? So we want to stamp out contempt from the relationship. From a neurological perspective, contempt is actually the activation of a trauma survival response, and specifically, contempt is the activation of a learned fight response. So when you reflect on that for a moment, it starts to make sense that the person is actually fighting to win, to have victory over the other person. I need to win this argument, and so what I'm going to use is the power of contempt to shut down the other person. So why are they doing that? Well, trauma survival response sounds really harsh, really hard. What's going on is the person has learned from an earlier experience or an earlier pattern of experiences that they are in danger relationally. They're in danger of being isolated, abandoned relationally. Back in history was a threatening experience, and they don't want it to happen. And so they have stored a trauma response of fight, even if they never acted it out back there, because let's face it, they wouldn't have acted it out back there because they wouldn't have won. If they're, for example, if their parent was being hostile and judgmental and harsh, they would feel trauma response, but they wouldn't act it out because they're not going to win a fight with their parents. So we have a trauma survival response stored. And then when this person is in an adult relationship, then that same feeling of being condescended to or spoken to harshly or simply feeling stressed or threatened relationally is going to activate this response, and it's going to get acted out as a fight response, specifically in the form of contempt, to try and shut down the other person. So what do we do about it? Dr. John Gottman argues that the antidote, the cure for contempt in a relationship, is for the couple to create a culture of appreciation. So basically creating a climate of appreciation, valuing and worthing the other party. And this needs to go both ways, and that's what makes it a culture or a climate. So ideally it involves the participation of both people, recognizing that this is happening, recognizing that this is a problem. In fact, it's actually destructive, the strongest predictor of divorce. And both people recognizing, okay, we need to do something different. We need to create a new climate. And the way to do that is to start expressing appreciation, valuing, both as a habit of mind in both people's minds and as spoken words, spoken behaviors. Breaking it out into both people, what we need to do is the person who's doing the contempt needs to recognize that this is destructive. And I mean, to put it bluntly, they need to stop trying to win the argument, stop trying to shut down the partner, stop trying to bring an abrupt end to this disagreement. Now, that's easier said than done, obviously. And what's required to actually implement that is probably some therapy. So that person needs to reach out, find a good and skilled therapist to help the person to feel secure enough within their own self to be able to tolerate the distress of a disagreement. I'm going to say that again. The person needs to work with a therapist, most likely, to cultivate and create sufficient security within their own self to be able to tolerate disagreement and conflict in their relationship without bringing this premature ending to the conflict through the weapon of contempt. Reach out to me and I can help you find a therapist or a coach that can help you do that. So what if you're the person on the receiving end of the contempt? You're probably the person watching this video, frankly. And I want you to know that there's things that you can do at your end that can change the culture, the climate of the relationship, change this dynamic unilaterally, even without your partner's participation. Here's what you need to do. You need to have a hard conversation with yourself to start with. Before you engage your partner about this destructive dynamic, you have to have a hard, honest conversation with yourself, and you have to ask yourself, are you willing to tolerate this contempt on an ongoing way or not? You need to have this conversation with yourself and decide, am I going to put up with this blankety blank anymore, or do I deserve better treatment? That's a hard conversation because you need to bring yourself to a specific answer. And I certainly hope that the answer is, no, I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. I deserve better treatment. So you might need to write that down in a journal, because you're making an agreement with yourself that you're going to be boundaried interpersonally, and you're going to be boundaried internally. I'm not going to tolerate mistreatment anymore. After you've had that hard conversation with yourself and maybe made a journal entry to hold yourself accountable, then you're going to go and have a hard conversation with your partner. You may need to work with a therapist or a coach before you do that, because what you need to do is you need to be very concrete and very clear with your partner that that disrespectful behavior is no longer going to be tolerated by you. that today is the first day of relationship 2.0, because you're not going to tolerate that contemptuous and disrespectful behavior anymore. Frankly, that conversation might have to happen a few times over the course of a few days, not weeks, not months, a few days, because you want to be sure that your partner understands what you mean when you're pointing out contempt and disrespect, because you're asking for it to stop. They need to know what exactly it is if they're going to modify their behavior. If it's been made clear and if it's been made concrete to your partner, then one of two things is going to happen. Maybe one of three things. One possibility is your partner reforms and changes their behavior because you've got through to them. And if that's the case, then that's fantastic. We have solved the problem. We've eliminated contempt from the relationship, and you're going to move ahead to have a great relationship. And I congratulate you on being fearless and courageous. That's one scenario. I love it. Another scenario is that your partner recognizes what you're saying, and they also recognize that they don't know how to change. And in that case, your partner, because they are valuing you, they take the initiative to go and get some help for themselves. Not because you nag and badger and cajole them, but because they value you. They take the initiative to go by themselves and seek out help from a good and skilled therapist or a good and skilled coach to help them work through the obstacles to them staying engaged in a respectful way in a relationship. So that's okay if they go and say, wow, you know what, I never really saw this before, but you're absolutely right. I'm going to get some help. Please be patient because I'm working on it. And I'm going to demonstrate the practical, concrete steps that I'm taking that demonstrate to you that I'm working on it. If that's the case, then, yep, hang on. Don't be rash or impulsive. Hang on and watch for the change, right? Not because you're nagging, not because you're cajoling, but because they're taking the initiative. Third scenario, you have that hard conversation. They probably say, yeah, you're right, I've been a bit of a dick and I should probably change. Pardon my language. And so you hear all the right words, but you watch and wait, and you notice a week goes by, 2 weeks go by, and there's no change. What do you do now? Well, what you do now is you go back and you read your journal, and your journal said that you weren't going to tolerate that. So what are you going to do? You're not going to tolerate it. You're not going to tolerate it. You made a covenant, you made an agreement with yourself that you weren't going to tolerate it. And here it is, 2 weeks more of you putting up with that crap. See why you had a hard conversation with yourself first? Because you covenanted that you weren't going to tolerate the disrespect, you were going to value yourself. So if it's this third scenario, I encourage you to notice it hasn't changed. Don't nag, don't cajole, don't beg. You've already done that for years, let's face it. So what you're going to do is, again, probably reach out for some help from a skilled therapist, and you're going to exit, because you have learned from the feedback that you've got from your partner that they don't want to change. I'm going to say that again. You've learned from the behavior, from the feedback from your partner that they don't want to change. They don't want to value you. And why on earth would you stay in a relationship where you're not valued? That question you need to take to your therapist, and you need to sort out an answer, and you need to implement the valuing of yourself. This has been a little bit of a longer video because this is a really, really hard topic. Contempt is a strongest predictor of the demise of a relationship, divorce or separation. It's got to stop. Ideally, both people participate in creating a new culture where appreciation prevails. Each person has their own task to create that change. The person doing the contempt needs to look inside and recognize why they can't tolerate a respectful relationship. The person on the receiving end of the contempt needs to do some serious soul searching, and they need to recognize why they're putting up with that crap, and they need to build the confidence and the esteem within their own self to unilaterally change it. That's absolutely possible. I'm Dr. Don Russell. I help people with this kind of business. And if you want help with this, reach out to me and I'll either direct you to somebody that can help you locally, or I can help you online through secure video. Thanks so much. Definitely click the subscribe button, and definitely click like because you like this video, and give me a comment down below what you think about this video and what you want to hear for another video after this one. Thanks so much. Hey, take good care of yourself. Take care of each other.